October the 14th, 1918. The German trenches on the Western Front. A soldier suffers a poison gas attack, is blinded, and taken to a hospital for special treatment. There, sightless and defeated, he makes a fateful decision to go into politics.
The extraordinary thing is that the war has transformed this person in the sense of believing that he has been singled out with a particular mission to save Germany.
His experiences in World War I could reveal why he went from being a drifter before the war to becoming the most infamous dictator in history. Investigating secret documents about his time as a soldier, and with access to leading scientists striving to understand his medical history, we open the mystery files on Adolf Hitler. Munich, Germany, 1914. A jubilant crowd greets the news of the outbreak of war in Europe. In the crowd is a 25-year-old penniless artist, Adolf Hitler. Professor Richard Evans has published one of the most comprehensive histories of the rise and fall of Hitler's regime.
His face is absolutely glowing with enthusiasm, excitement, fulfillment. For him, this is a dream. Germany is now fighting the world for, as he sees it, for domination.
In August 1914, Germany invades Belgium and France. In defense of their neighbors, Britain declares war on Germany. The continent divides itself between the Central Powers, including Germany, and the Allies, including Britain. For many people on both sides, war is a chance to assert their country's greatness. Terry Charman is an expert on the world wars of the 20th century.
There really was a sense of war fever in Europe, people obviously not realizing what war was going to be like.
Hitler volunteers for the 16th Bavarian Reserve Regiment, known as the List Regiment. After several weeks' training, he is sent directly to the Western Front fighting for Germany, although he is not even German. Adolf Hitler is born in Branau, Austria, on the 20th of April, 1889, the son of a minor customs official.
Hitler's mother, Clara, really doted on Hitler. His father wished him to follow in his footsteps and join the Austro-Hungarian customs, and this Hitler absolutely refused to do. And certainly I think Hitler received quite a lot of beatings and thrashings from his father.
His father dies in 1903. 4 years later, at the age of 18, Hitler moves to the capital of Austria, Vienna. Later that year, his mother dies, leaving him orphaned with no close family ties. In Vienna, he lives here, in a flat not far from the city center.
He was searching around for something to do or something to be, for an identity even, but not succeeding at all.
Hitler fails to make a living.
In the winter of 1909-1910, Hitler was, to all intents and purposes, a vagrant, sleeping on park benches, in public shelters, unshaven, and pretty verminous as well.
Alone and with few prospects, he moves to Munich in 1913. There is no sign in young Hitler of the leadership qualities later displayed by the infamous dictator of Germany. That is, until after World War I. For 4 years, from 1914 to 1918, Adolf Hitler fights against the Allies during the war as a private in the trenches.
I think the war gave him a sense of mission and a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging.
Military psychiatrist Professor Simon Wesley has a theory about Hitler's time as a soldier.
The war was the ultimate transformative experience for him. Without the war, we don't have the Hitler that we know, the post-war. If we had interviewed him in 1914 or whenever, the one thing we'd have concluded quite categorically, whatever Hitler was, he wasn't insane.
In 1918, Germany is defeated by the Allied forces, leaving Hitler's beloved nation in a state of chaos and leading to economic collapse. Building on and exploiting this national humiliation, Hitler and his Nazi party rise to power in Germany.
There's assassinations, there's violence, there's fights, there's bloodshed. In no one more violently than in Hitler himself.
Hitler believes that the only way for Germany to be a great nation is to build a larger German empire across Europe. It is a belief that will lead to World War II.
I don't think anybody will probably actually seriously rival him in the consciousness of being probably the most evil man we've ever seen.
Before World War I, Hitler is down and out with no political ambitions. But after the war, it's politics that drives him. What happened in those 4 years of war to turn a socially awkward loner into a future charismatic leader? In 1914, the Western Front is the main battleground of the war. German troops on the eastern side, Allied troops on the western side. The front eventually stretches hundreds of kilometers, from the English Channel to the border of Switzerland. Soldiers on both sides dig in. They build a series of fortified trenches from which they can launch attacks on the enemy. October 1914, a battle erupts at Ypres, Belgium. Piet Schielands is an expert on the Western Front. He is retracing Hitler's footsteps in one of the trenches where he had his brutal introduction to trench warfare.
It was a tough, almost certainly hand-to-hand combat. So bayonet fighting, rifle fire from close range, machine guns. The regiment suffers a great deal. Hitler is present in that attack.
After a month of fighting, over 20,000 Germans are killed. Hundreds in Hitler's regiment perish. The two opposing armies entrench themselves into a stalemate position. But Hitler isn't always on the front lines. His role is as a messenger, a dispatch runner. Schielands examines a bunker where Hitler would have likely carried messages.
There were thousands of German bunkers of all types. You would have bunkers in the firing line, but you also would have defensive works line after line, up to 10 kilometers deep. Hitler's role as a dispatch runner would be to go back and forth between headquarters and smaller command posts near the front line. And that is quite a dangerous undertaking.
Hitler is a dedicated soldier and is awarded a medal, the Iron Cross.
He certainly was not a shirker. He was not a coward, and it's pretty clear that this was, almost the happiest time of his life.
The Western Front becomes Hitler's home.
He'd been drifting up to the beginning of the war. Now he's found his true vocation as fighting for Germany. But this doesn't mean that he is one of the lads. The other troops regarded him as a bit of an oddball. He used to sit in a corner of the trench sketching and drawing while they were telling jokes.
It's a far cry from his life before the war, when Hitler was in Vienna, harboring aspirations of becoming an artist.
In his late adolescence, he's determined to make his way as an artist. He doesn't think of becoming active in politics at all. And he goes to Vienna in order to try and get admission to the Vienna Academy. He tries to get in, fails the examination, tries a second time, fails it a second time. He's absolutely devastated by this.
It's humiliation for him. He thought that he would sort of pass with flying colours, and he doesn't.
This is a record of one of Hitler's rejections from the Vienna Academy. The failure feeds into his own sense of being an outsider. In wartime, Hitler's alienation could have been reinforced after he survives a number of deadly assaults. In one instance, a position he has just left is blown up, and everyone inside is killed or wounded.
We know soldiers are superstitious, and we know that those who survive these kind of experiences often think that they have become special.
But in 1916, his luck runs out. Hitler fights at the Somme.
The bombardment started on the 24th of June.
The British assault on the Germans is relentless.
You can imagine that incessant shells coming over, the whine of the shells, the thump of them exploding. That's a whole week of that, non-stop.
Hitler is delivering a message when he is caught in an attack.
Hitler's wounded quite late in the battle from a British artillery shell. I think it's shrapnel in the thigh that hits him.
He's removed to a hospital far from the front line. What is important about this period is that Hitler later claimed that it is during this time that his views about the Jews intensified. The source of Hitler's later pathological anti-Semitism is much debated.
If you actually look at Hitler's life before 1914, you can find very little evidence of anti-Semitism.
He did read anti-Semitic literature before the war, as did much of Vienna society. But surprisingly, he had a good working relationship with some Jewish people. However, it is while recuperating in 1916 and 1917 that he comes to believe that the Jewish population of Germany is not fully supportive of the war.
This was a complete myth. In fact, the German Jews, who were less than 1% of the population, were overrepresented in the armed forces in the war.
Over 100,000 Jews fight in the war for Germany, with over 30,000 receiving decorations for bravery. After 6 months away from the front line, Hitler is patched up and returns to the trenches. A year later, the British launch a major offensive against the German lines. October the 14th, 1918. Hitler faces another turning point in his life, a gas attack. He later writes, "The English gas attack burst loose." At around midnight, a few soldiers of his regiment fall around him. Hitler writes, "A few hours later, my eyes were like glowing coals, and all was darkness around me." He is blinded. Pete Cheelens investigates Hitler's account of the gas attack.
This book is the published diary of Hitler's regiment. This one here is quite rare because it is one of the few original accounts of Hitler's doing, so without him intervening in it, so that's quite important. Hitler is also mentioned in the book. Here it is. He is here walking down in one of the back areas.
There is also an account of the gas attack.
On the 14th of October, there was an attack on our right side of the division. So it's quite clear and very near to the personal history of Adolf Hitler.
Gas is released from canisters or fired from mortars far across enemy lines.
As they are on patrol, they are shelled with gas shells.
There is panic. Suddenly, you're choking, you can't see, you can't breathe, and this is a devastating weapon of war.
During the attack, poison gas would have affected Hitler's body profoundly. The mouth blisters, exposed skin blisters. The eyes swell and water profusely. Inhaled, the respiratory tract inflames, making it hard to breathe and incapacitating the soldier. The lungs blister and bleed. In many, the effects can be fatal. Unable to see, the morning after, Hitler's patrol is marched away from the front line. He spends a short period here, at a temporary hospital behind German lines. Hitler is assessed, then sent to another hospital, hundreds of kilometers from the front. The admission papers feature the name Adolf Hitler, and the symptoms scribbled down as gas poisoning. But the first clue to Hitler's suspected real sickness could be found in the hospital he is sent to, Pasewalk.
It's possible that he was being sent there because it also had a psychiatric unit, and that's rather curious.
Pasewalk had its fair share of physically wounded men. There were also men suffering from mental ailments.
Dr. David Lewis is a cognitive psychologist. He has studied Hitler's medical history during the war.
As the war progressed, more and more soldiers were being admitted to hospital with what essentially were psychological problems.
The most widespread disorder is commonly known as shell shock.
Their minds have simply broken down under the pressures of war. They haven't been shot, they haven't been caught in a grenade attack, they haven't been shelled.
We would now call that maybe combat fatigue or acute stress disorder.
Unlike some of the other patients, Hitler is not believed to have suffered from shell shock. But there is another specifically gas-related possible diagnosis.
A form of gas hysteria is the word that's used to describe people whose symptoms are purely anxiety.
As a man with aspirations of becoming an artist, Hitler might have feared losing his eyesight more than most. His medical records are long lost, but there are intriguing details that survive in the archives. In 1943, an American intelligence agency conducted an interview with a doctor who consulted at Pasewalk Hospital. The report records that Hitler is diagnosed with blindness, brought on by hysteria. Doctors believe that hysterical blindness is a psychological disorder triggered by a traumatic event, in this case, a gas attack.
At some level they can see, but they don't believe they can see.
Hysterical blindness is still around. It's not very common, but it's still recognized.
Even today, with modern scientific techniques for imaging the brain, this kind of problem remains largely mysterious. For the doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists on all fronts, during the war, it is an absolute baffling mystery.
Hitler is one of thousands of cases of hysteria recorded during the war.
We know from studying images of the brain that there are certain areas which seem to be involved.
In a normal working brain, input from the eye is sent to the thalamus, a region of the brain that is believed to influence behavior as well as vision. Information is then transmitted to the striate cortex within the occipital lobe, the primary visual area in the brain. But with hysterical blindness, one possible proposal is that the visual cortex is not switched on normally, and the thalamus could be overworking. The end result is that although there may be no physical brain damage, the visual processing system is not fully functioning.
Some bits of the brain are actively trying to suppress the function of vision.
This may be due to the brain's inbuilt emotional responses designed to protect the individual. According to the US intelligence report, the doctor who diagnoses Hitler is Professor Edmund Forster. Forster is a 40-year-old military psychiatrist. One of his known techniques is psychological.
He says you should treat them as whiny children. They need to be bullied, they need to be harangued, they need to be shouted at, they need to be punished.
After weeks at the hospital, Hitler may have regained some of his sight. But then, in November 1918, news reaches him that Germany has surrendered to the Allies. The war is over. Hitler is devastated.
According to Hitler's own account in Mein Kampf, all the toil, the suffering, all the effort was too much for him and he broke down.
The shock of defeat causes Hitler to relapse into full blindness. Lewis believes that Forster would have noticed Hitler's passionate patriotism.
He must have realized that if he could use this to persuade Hitler he could see, by persuading him that he had a destiny.
Hitler later writes that his voice of conscience cried out to him. His vision returns, and along with it comes a self-proclaimed new path in life, politics. Throughout the war, Hitler showed no leadership qualities and never rose above the rank of private first class. But by the end of the war, his thinking has changed.
The period that Hitler spent in hospital was when he, I think, began to realize that he should do something. It's when he becomes politically active.
I believe that burning in the back of his mind was this single belief, the belief that somehow destiny had singled him out.
But the mystery doesn't end there. During Hitler's rise to power in the 1920s and 1930s, Dr. Forster is head of medicine at Greifswald University, north of Berlin. Although he is a German patriot, Forster is not a Nazi sympathizer.
Forster is always very much opposed to Hitler.
The US intelligence report of 1943 states that the Nazi Party set out to silence Forster, possibly fearing that he knows too much about Hitler's potentially embarrassing psychological illness. September 1933, a gunshot is heard from the Forster house. The doctor is found dead at home in his bathroom with a gun by his side. The cause of death is given as suicide.
There was no inquest held. There was no post-mortem carried out.
Lewis believes that there is an alternative theory.
My view is Foster's murder was ordered by the Nazi hierarchy because they saw him as a danger.
The gas attack seems to be a turning point in Hitler's legend. He later uses the event as propaganda, explaining it as a moment of revelation, and using the defeat in the war as a central theme in his politics during his rise to power. More than 8.5 million soldiers die in World War I. 1.8 million Germans.
No one emerges from war the same person that they were when they went in. Thank God most people don't end up quite as different as Hitler did.